Hello, welcome back to my podcast, Cesar, where we discuss dictatorships and their implications. In this episode, we will discuss the rise of an infamous Cuban dictator, Fulgencio Batista, from his origins to the man who ended his reign. We will get into all of that in today's episode. So, who was Fulgencio Batista before he became a dictator? Batista's connection to power started quite early when he joined the army as a private. In 1932, he became a military tribunal stenographer with the rank of sergeant. For those who don't know, a military tribunal stenographer is responsible for creating a verbatim or word-for-word record of military legal proceedings. Throughout these next two episodes, you're going to see how Cuba is mostly dominated by a cycle of dictatorships, and Batista was no different. When he entered politics, he gained the public's favor by leading a rebellion against dictator Gerardo Machado and forcing the provisional president to resign. Batista was finally elected president in 1940. In terms of presidency and leadership, the future seemed promising, but Batista had other plans for his country. At first, things were really good. Under Batista's rule, a new constitution was drafted to provide a social safety net to citizens by giving the government the right to intervene in the economy. In 1944, Fulgencio Batista's presidency term came to an end. Since he was legally prohibited from seeking immediate re-election in his country, and his chosen successor lost the next presidential election to Ramon Grau, Batista voluntarily exiled himself from Cuba for 8 years to live in Florida. In that time span, everything in Cuba went downhill. The actions that Batista had put in place to protect the country were completely disbanded by Grau. Grau was a classic dictator and dedicated his presidency to tearing down the democracy Batista built. In 1952, presidential elections rolled back around, and Batista saw this as his opportunity to run for presidency once more. Cuban voters did not seem to want Batista back, though. They didn't really want him in office, and it was obvious that he was no longer a top contender for the presidency. And because of this, he staged a coup and forcefully reclaimed his seat in office. This wasn't the worst thing, right? Coups were pretty common at this point, and based on his last presidency, Batista seemed like he would have some pretty progressive ideals. He seemed to make the lives of the Cuban people better the last time, and he wouldn't repeat that dictatorial cycle Cuba was known for at that point, right? But this time was different. Batista seized the presidency with changed intentions. He became obsessed with gaining the acceptance of Cuba's upper classes and dedicated most of his time to pursuits of wealth. According to the American Experience, Batista exposed Havana to large-scale gambling, announcing that his government would match, dollar for dollar, any hotel investment over $1 million, which would include a casino license. Needless to say, Batista's popularity plummeted quickly. He was now targeted by a man he imprisoned, Fidel Castro, and the United States government expressed how they could no longer support his regime. It was no longer a democracy, and the U.S. likes democracy. Backed into a corner, Batista's ambassador suggested he seek exile in Spain, and so he did. On New Year's Eve, 1958, Batista left Cuba with 180 of his closest confidants. He lived the rest of his life peacefully in Spain and Portugal. He died in 1973 in Marbella, Spain, 2 days before a team of assassins from Castro's Cuba could carry out a plan to kill him. Thank you for tuning in. That wraps up today's episode about dictator Fulgencio Batista. I wanted to talk a little bit more about Fidel Castro in this episode, but considering how intertwined Castro and Batista's stories are, I think it's better to wait until episode 3, where we will be discussing the continued brutality in Cuba under Castro's 50-year reign. Until then, I'm Layla, and this has been another episode of Cesar.